Hello and welcome to this fifth and final module of Letters to My Daughters. I'm so glad that you all have joined. Wherever you are joining, at whatever time you are joining, welcome into this virtual space. As you entered into the virtual space, you should have been prompted to place your prayer request, praise report, whatever is on your heart in the chat. And so as you continue to do that, before we get to anything else for this session, let us first center ourselves and ground ourselves in a moment of prayer. Let's pray. Gracious and eternal God, we give you thanks and praise for this day that you have made. God, I thank you for each and every person who has joined in this space. God, our prayer is that as they are placing their prayer requests, as they are making their prayer requests known to you, oh God, that you would receive them and respond as you see fit. God, I thank you that you have carried us along the way thus far. And God, for our time together now, I pray that your presence might be felt. Be with us now in this time of conversation and storytelling. And God, we will ensure that your name gets all of the glory and the honor and the praise that is due. It is in your Son, Jesus' name, that we do pray. And together the people of God said, Amen. You all, we have made it to the end. We have made it to the fifth and final module of Letters to My Daughters. You know, when we first began planning this and envisioning what this could be, our hope and intention was simply that we could create a way to share a space, to share a narrative about what's happening around this particular issue of Black maternal health. What I did not anticipate was that we would come together quite literally from all around the world, across the United Methodist connection, but then also across several different denominations, across communities that have nothing to do with the church, but still were curious about how our faith might compel us to respond to social conditions, but then respond in a more comprehensive way. I am grateful for each and every one of you who has joined. I'm grateful that you have committed to this process of simply opening your mind and your heart to hear of different things happening outside of your purview. And so over the course of Letters to My Daughters, I begin to really see that one of the sort of like recurring threads that came up, whether in virtual sessions or we would often present of the work of Letters to My Daughters and facilitate mock virtual sessions in other work that we were doing with Church and Society. But in all those instances, this notion of storytelling kept rising to the surface. Women would come and share of their stories of, maternal health stories and share of their birth stories or share of things that were deeply personal to them. I also began to realize, and perhaps I knew this before, but really began to hone in on some of those cultural factors that would contribute to our inability to share stories. We all know the power of storytelling. We know that it does work not just for the person sharing that story, but for the people around them, that it may be another way to receive information and pass down wisdom and knowledge and understanding in a way that perhaps could not be attained in any other method. And so what I am taking with me is the fact that our next step, our charge beyond Letters to My Daughters, or at least this iteration, is that we must begin to tell the story. We must begin to speak truth. We must begin to speak our personal truth. And so I have entitled this last module, I Leave You, Stories Untold. because there are so many of you who have yet to tell your story. There is power in it. I know that for a fact. And so for this last module, I am joined by several of my friends, colleagues, coworkers, in reflecting on their personal stories, and also in sharing our prayers and dreams and hopes for the stories that have yet to be told. For this session, I am joined by Reverend Laura Kigweba. She serves here at the General Board of Church and Society as the Director of Grassroots Organizing. And she has her own story that she will tell us tonight. I hope that you will enjoy the conversation that we had about Laura's story. But then also, I hope that you will glean something about what you are taking with you even beyond this program. And so, without further ado, here is our conversation for tonight. Introduce to us who you are, the people that you come from, and you know how we do through the maternal lineage. Who are the people that you come from? What do you do at Church and Society? What are your hopes, dreams, and fears for the world? Anything that you would like to share.
Oh, wow. Camille, first of all, thank you, right? Thank you for the abundance of truth telling that you've co-created in the series, and also how you have in so many ways modeled, even in the imagery, right, that is your grandmother with the image that has held this series. So just thank you for your vision, your commitment, and also the invitation to be here. So thank you. Yes, so I'm Reverend Laura Kigweba. I am the daughter of Kamana and Caritas Kigweba, and there's two lineages that I do want to lift up, both my paternal and my maternal side, because they are deeply important to me and ground me in this work. This work that I do, I serve as the Director of Grassroots Organizing for the General Board of Church and Society. But on my father's side, he is the son of Simone Kigweba, who's the son of Birohera, the descendant of the Abachamuke tribe on Zege Hill in Gitega, Burundi. And on my mother's side, Caritas, who's the daughter of Banzi Rumahito, who's the daughter of Bona Corenzo, also in Gitega. And so you may not be familiar with those names. It's another language of Kirundi, which is the mother tongue of Burundi. And it is my ancestral language. And that is what deeply roots me, both lineages and who they are and make me who I am right now.
Thank you for speaking their names, inviting them into this space.
Yes.
When you think about the lives that they lived or your relationship with them, what about your memories of them inform the work that you do today? In what ways?
That's such a good question. So actually, there was so much, like when I saw your questions, I was like, oh, I need to sit with this. So I sat with the question.
I'm trying to be Oprah, okay? We're trying to be Oprah.
That was so good. I sat with those questions and I was just so grateful because I feel like often in this work of justice, we don't invite ourselves to pause and remind ourselves of the why. And so your questions really invited me to really consider and be reminded of the why I do this work. And also for our conversation today, I am wearing these really beautiful beads that come from the women all over Burundi, actually. And have been passed down from multiple women to women, which is a reminder of the multiple saints and witnesses that hold me in this work of justice. And when I think about the memories of not of my paternal, maternal lineage, so many things come to mind. I think earlier on in my work of justice, the forefront story was both of my parents surviving genocides that happened in Burundi in 1994 and 1972. And that used to be the dominant story of why I've been called to justice, is because of how my family survived this, of how the church also mobilized in many ways. The Quaker Church mobilized and the Catholic Church mobilized to care for my dad to come to the States. And then my dad was able to bring my mom to the States. But even though their lives were saved, many of our family and friends were lost in those wars. And it's really interesting that now that I've been engaged in the ministry of justice, I guess for the last 2 decades or so, that has shifted for me, where the story of why I do this work isn't just shaped by that trauma, but it's very much also shaped by what was even before those wars existed. And so this past summer, I had the opportunity to go to Burundi for the first time in the last 32 years and see the hill where my family is descended from, meet family members who knew of both my paternal and my maternal side. And it helped me reframe this justice that is connected to like this collective witness of people that aren't just, I think, within the story of suffering, but had a whole existence of healers, of teachers, of caretakers. And so when I think about especially this work of creating change through the lens of organizing, my family and my lineage, their stories kind of reinforce like why I do this work, like the stories that are beyond just being the survivor of war, but these stories of our resilience and even what was before and also what has been after that time of violence. And so I think that's kind of what keeps me here, is knowing that our whole stories need to be told, not just the things that we survive. And so I hope that's helpful and makes sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. I didn't know, or maybe I did, that you went to Burundi last summer. Okay.
In June for a very short time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. What a treat. Okay. So then in this context of creating change, right? Or evoking change, igniting change, all the things that we seek to do around change of social conditions and structures, specifically around Black maternal health. And I actually, Laura, I have to thank you for guiding me when I first got here and listening to just the relationships that you had already built in terms of organizations and people who were doing this work, and your own level of expertise in terms of like thinking theologically, right, about how we are showing up to this issue informed a lot of my own like initial thoughts of like, how are we, like, what is this framework going to be? How are we going to craft that? And so I'm grateful because, you know, guidance is a thing, and being able to work in tandem and in partnership is a blessing in ministry, you know, like just,
yes.
You know. Yes. So if you could, when we talk about Black maternal health, I have sought out to center the lived experiences, right, of, you know, our own experiences, of the women, girls, and femmes who are around us. And if you would, to the extent that you are comfortable, share of your experience, either of your own maternal health journey or things that you have observed in your work around Black maternal health.
Yeah. Wow. Again, Great question. And to your point about guidance, I think how I journeyed to this work around both advocacy and organizing specific to Black maternal health was all about guidance, and connecting with Susan Burton, who's a former staff member of GBCS and had the role of women and children that now has been combined for your role years ago. She was the first one who we began having this conversation about the realities of Black maternal health, and also specifically the church's response in terms of both advocacy and creating spaces for the church to hold sacred space for women, families, and children who are navigating the realities of a maternal health crisis. And I think that initial conversation was 2012. And I was looking back, and it wasn't until 2018 where we then, as church and society, started unpacking the systemic realities of the maternal health crisis that wasn't just about the crisis around healthcare, but also how that crisis is informed throughout the intersections of racism, of class, of even like gender, in terms of when we talk about women and femmes and who really does have access and how that is held within the medical system. And so it was 2018 where there were larger themes around the reality of weathering. And weathering being this term specifically for Black women and women of color who experience racial injustice in this country, so much so that it ages your body 7 years. And I remember kind of doing this work. I came into church and society in 2018, was doing work around maternal health then. Through one of our other colleagues, Jesse, we did the service to kind of uplift the reality of both maternal health and the faith response. And I remember sharing just the reality of, being an early 30 something then, but knowing my reproductive health journey was actually 37 because of the reality of racism that my body has endured and held. And so when we kind of frame and understand the way that systems of oppression, specifically classism and racism, impact us, it's like the church has to respond to these realities because we are living this reality, as I am Laura, but I'm also a pastor who holds space both in the public square as well as in the church. And so this question about then, if this is who I am, if this is what I'm literally experiencing, how do I equip both myself and the church to respond to such a very delicate and real just truth, right? That this is something that that I personally experience, but then on this wider scale, it's something that so many people experience, and I think we have seen that throughout our advocacy, especially, I think it happened a couple of years ago around the Kira for Moms Act and the death of Kira Johnson, and kind of how that really broke open this truth telling around Black women and also women of color who have experienced significant harms through the medical system when it comes to both pregnancy and postpartum, and the lack of services there. And so I would say when it comes to this work around Black maternal health, it has been this ongoing journey of truth telling more even for myself, and doing some digging, realizing that even with my family on my paternal and my maternal side, every woman has experienced either death or a complication in pregnancy. And so what then does it look like to create a world, to be part of creating a world where that no longer is anyone's reality or truth? And so it has been an interesting journey that I think the last thing I will say, um, it has also been a journey of hopefulness because in this pattern of like telling our stories, of even encountering my own story, there's also been this kind of ongoing journey of like, we don't want this to happen again. So then we have to articulate and envision what is the world that we are creating where it's not going to be. And so I've been really grateful for journeying with folks like United Methodists for Reproductive Justice, that are a group of women and persons, faith leaders, sexual educators, birth equity advocates who've been doing this work around how do we tangibly create this world where no one experiences harm when it comes to the medical industrial complex. And then also just thinking about other organizations who've been journeying this work as well. So I feel that's a really long answer, but yeah.
I think that it flows into the next question that I have, in that when we talk about truth telling and we talk about the role of storytelling, I've also observed that, throughout Letters to My Daughters, right? When I started to realize, like, okay, it is the experience that needs to be told in an authentic way. And I began to reach out to different women. Can you tell your story? Can you tell, like, what was your maternal health journey like? And like, would you be willing to write a letter about it? Can you come on the podcast? And we would have the conversation. And then when I asked them to do it in a public manner, they're like, I love you, girl, but no. So I think that opened up for me, right, this reality that I've always known, but I think in naming several things. One, culturally, right, we come from, and I think among generations, right, we are coming from a culture wherein you do not discuss, right, these personal matters. I know the women in my own family, when I, was having, and, sort of just like fleshing through my thoughts and, with the women of my, grandmother's contemporaries, and, they were like, yeah, no, we didn't talk about pregnancies. Then like we didn't talk, certainly not to our mothers or the women in our family, about like what was happening to our bodies. And so recognizing, one, that like culturally we are working towards a culture shift, and that like simply like talking about the things that are happening to your body, right, that we have to be mindful of that we have not come from, right, a tradition of that, but we are shifting that. But then also, and to right, to notice that it is both cultural, but then there's like this element of trauma that is very much present, that is entwined with this work of storytelling, right? And so as you were talking, I'm thinking like, man, like for you to be able to name, right, that the women in your family either have had multiple complications in birth and or died, that's heavy.
Yeah.
And so that is a reality for many. And so I think the question that I'm hoping to get to is, how do we get or move from, transition from acknowledging trauma in our stories to this place of healing, so that we may tell the story? Because in telling the story, right, I was thinking, I was like, it's implied, right, that we are talking from this space of healing or being made whole, right? Because we don't want people to open wounds, right? Premise of justice, right? Women, we believe in, making sure that the folk are all right.
Yeah.
And so in that, right, the question then becomes, okay, yeah, so how do we like culture shift,
Mm.
In that we are moving from this shift wherein we do not talk about or historically have not talked about our bodies to now we are very much talking about our bodies. But then also at play is how do we move from this space of trauma to our bodies and our experiences to a place of healing or being made well so that they get to that place of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. That is the question.
Right?
Yeah. Because I feel like the healing has only just begun. So, counselor, Counselor Deborah Haskins talks about. There's a presentation that she named. I think it was at the Black Clergy Women Gathering, where she talked about what trauma is, and Dr. Haskins defined trauma as almost making the abnormal normal. And I think to what you said, yeah, recognizing that it is an abnormal reality for lineages that I hold to have consistently experienced either a death or a pregnancy complication. That is not normal. And I think what is also not normal is that those stories haven't never really been told, or in some kind of time period within the generations of my family, it was almost just accepted that, oh, so and so died in childbirth. That it was just so common when and so commonly accepted when that shouldn't be, right? That there should be persons who have the joy of knowing that they are pregnant, being able to make it through the 9 months and bring the child and still have their life, and that be a treasured, beautiful experience rather than one that does hold trauma. And so I think kind of moving from the trauma to the healing really just starts with us sharing our stories, actually unpacking those stories. And I think for those of us within the US context, unpacking the reality of our healthcare system that was built within this larger context of slavery. And so thinking about the foundations of obstetrics within this country that was named under Marion Sims, who is known within the medical system as a father of gynecology, who had 8 slaves that he operated on without anesthesia. And we know those names today, Lucia, Narca, and Betsy. But how long have Lucia, Narca, Betsy, and the 5 others been waiting to have their stories told? And so I think a part of being able to move from the trauma of injustice, the trauma of violence against our bodies as Black women, against our bodies as women, is being able to simply start and sharing our story. And it's really beautiful. Bell Hooks, in her book, Sisters of Yams, Black Women and Self-Recovery, she names that healing begins in sharing our testimony. And so I think it's very important for us within this work. And by sharing your testimony, I think it's really unique to the church experience, right? Especially the Black church experience of like being able to testify, tell your truth on a Sunday morning. But I think I would take it one step back about personally, how have you testified to yourself, and both honoring the pain that you have experienced and then being able maybe to share it with one person, share it with another. And so I think, Camille, what you've done in terms of these intimate invitations to first kind of process what is your own story, and then will you bring it to the rest of the church, I think is a way to shift culture. Because so many of us, and even thinking about the history that I've outlined in terms of Lucy, Betsy, and Anarcha, when were they asked to share their story of what happened to them? And I think a part of us sharing our testimony is providing that invitation that healing is possible, and what we've endured will no longer be normalized. And that something else can be, which is the care, the love, the dignity that Lucy, Betsy, and Anarcha deserved, and that every single one of us will deserve here on out, right? So I think that kind of relationship from trauma to healing just begins with us taking the first step to share our own testimony. So, yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing up this aspect of the church being somewhat of a space that is primed to do that, right? Because we do, especially in the Black church, come from this tradition of witnessing and testifying.
Yes.
Question that I had, right? And so for those who are watching, right, I say that the Black church is the only church that you can testify, right? It is a tradition that we are raising up and acknowledging, because I do think that this work of holding sacred space, of curating sacred space, is work that we can all participate in. Mm-hmm. When we get to that point where the community is ready to hold space so that women are able to share their stories, right, to testify, what do you think needs to be present in terms of, like, what are the markers of sacred space for storytelling?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a really good question, because I honor that every context is different.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, the church is ready. Like, right, we come in on Sunday mornings, and there is that time right after the announcements before the first hymn where we offer that invocation. That is an invitation for the Holy Spirit to be welcomed and acknowledged. And so I think one of the markers of sacred space is making sure that every person who wants to share their story is able to share it on their own terms and their own timing and their own truth. I think as much as the church is primed to be that space of testimony, I think sometimes we play it safe and ask, only share this part of your story, only share this part of your story, when I think one of the markers of sacredness is like, just bring your whole self. And so it's really interesting. We have this language of all are welcome. But I think as the church, we need to affirm that all is, even in the messiness, even in the uncomfortable, is welcome. And so I'm really appreciative of the United Methodists for Reproductive Justice, along with Chaplain Autumn, did a service, I think it was 2 years ago, holding space for the realities of both of reproductive loss. It was a service of lament and hope. And you can go back and watch it on Church and Society YouTube page. And I think that was this perfect opportunity to show the church and our community of how to hold that sacred space, of how to welcome all, of being able to name the messiness and complex of loss, but also speak to the hopefulness of life, and life being the fact of our community holds us, our faith practices hold us. And so I think one of the markers is making sure, well, two of the markers I've named at this point, making sure that persons are able to tell their story in their own time and in their own way, and leaving room for all of the complexities that come with naming our reproductive journeys, and all that kind of comes with that.
Yeah. What is your prayer for those stories that are preparing to be told, but have yet been told?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think my prayer is that everyone tells their story and doesn't hold anything back. And I think another part of that prayer is know that in telling your story, others will tell their own, right? That there is a part of when you share, other folks will also have comfortable to share their own experience. And I think it's really interesting reflecting back in my own maternal journey that in me kind of wrestling with my story, I've uncovered the story of my ancestors as well. And so just thinking about how when we are ready and willing to share that story, there's so much that will happen in us, but also in the others who listen to it as well. And so my prayer is that you'll just tell it in your own authenticity, in your own truth, and tell it in the way that you need so that we are all able to share in the ways that we need.
And then finally, what is your prayer for the church when we think about the United Methodist Church? But then also, I'm really grateful because we have had people come from all over, right? It has been an ecumenical convening, people who are not in the church, people who are returning to the church. And so I guess when we consider uh, what is the task and mission of the faith community in whatever form we may find that to be. What is your prayer for the faith community at large when addressing Black maternal health?
Yeah, I think my prayer for the faith community, especially the global community, since we are a connectional church that is beyond the US, is that we do this work together. Honestly, there like Black maternal health is not an offset issue. Like the fact that Black women are experiencing a crisis when it comes to our bodily autonomy speaks to how we treat all people. And I just really hope that as a church, we hold that truth rather than sometimes siloing different experiences and thinking that they aren't connected, which we truly all are. And so I really, really desire and pray for a church that sees, acknowledges, and cares for Black women and all women as, I think I would say, as, I don't want to misuse this word, but like when I say as like one experience, I'm not speaking about uniformity, but really speaking about like, because there is this ongoing crisis that Black women are experiencing when it comes to maternal health, it's our crisis too, right? Like that, it's nothing that is separate, but it's something that we should actively be working towards as we have done in all other issues. And so I think my prayer is just for the church to make space for that, for the church to see themselves within the realities of Black women and be able to create sacred space that does the work of transforming and making a world where this is not a reality, where there is no maternal health crisis, but that all persons, all birthing people are able to experience and thrive, whether in giving birth and just giving life in all the way that that means. So yeah, that's a long prayer, but I think that that is mine.
Laura, thank you so much for being with us, for your wisdom and your
You.
experience.
Thank you.
You for closing out Letters to My Daughters. I'm really grateful.
What? I can't wait. It's coming back again. I'm excited. I can't believe it's done. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I am so grateful for the life, the work, the witness, the ministry of Reverend Kigweba. I am so grateful for the conversation and just being able to share community with her as we shared some of our hopes and dreams for even our work and ministry here at Church and Society. Before we go, I have another person whose story I would like to center. I have had the absolute pleasure of working with Miss Alina Cicito. She has served as a theological intern with us, where she started first with us in the summer and then has been such an integral part of Letters to My Daughters that we extended her internship. And I thought it would also be fitting for her to share a part of her story. And so for our feature letter, I asked Alina to write for us words that she, felt necessary to share to close us out for this 5th module. And so I'd like to read for you all her letter. She writes, "To Isabel, to Maywa, and all those young women and girls out there. You may have been wondering why I invest so much time and energy working on gender and social justice and what my Christian faith has to do with it. What about if I answer by telling you some of my own story? As a Bolivian woman with indigenous roots, early on in life, I learned how it felt to be treated differently because I was a woman and because of the color of my skin. Several times I've experienced firsthand what it felt like to be dismissed, mistreated, and discriminated against for who I was and how I looked. I've been pushed aside, yelled at, and accused for no reason at school, in the neighborhood playground, in the stores, and even sometimes at church. In the beginning, I thought I was the only one thinking this way, but when I started going with my mom to the special church women's meetings as a young girl, I learned I was not alone in the struggle. These women and my mother had lots to say about the challenges in their daily lives, especially those things harming our souls, bodies, hearts, and even our minds. Hearing them and later encouraging me to speak as a teenager allowed me to realize that I had a voice and something to say, and that my questions and questioning were critical to sustaining life for our families and our community. I had lots of questions. It simply did not make sense in my mind and my heart that because I was not a man and had darker skin than those whiter ones portrayed as beautiful or better, I was to be treated everywhere I went differently, and almost always with disdain. It did not make sense because I knew I was wonderfully made and crafted by God's hands and unconditionally loved how I am. Why would some people dare to treat God's creation with disdain? At home, hearing Mom's experiences as a young woman, as a mother of 5 dealing with so few resources and lots of social pressure, it made me realize she was more than my mother. She was someone with wisdom to share beyond cooking or cleaning tips. She was an amazing, courageous woman. She was a fighter for life against all odds and trials. She knew how to organize people and loved teaching others. If nothing else, and there is a lot, I learned to speak up, look at life with a critical mind, and not accept crumbs from under the table when there is injustice and darkness surrounding me and our people. We live in a society that adores the superficial figure of a mother, but does little to ensure that future bearers of life who look like me have access to good information, education, food on the table, and health services that allow us all to dream and bring sacred lives without fears and worries. Last year, I witnessed firsthand how discriminatory health systems harmed a pregnant woman's body, mental health, and self-worth. The direct implications were clear on the newborn, the new family, and the whole community where she belongs. It hurt our family. There is so much to do. I can hear Jesus calling us to spread good news for everyone and to take our place and responsibility to advocate and fight for better conditions of life, to advocate for laws and spaces to protect you, me, and all the precious lives to come. The truth is that I do not see myself believing in it without actions. I do not believe our faith is to be passive, quietly sitting in the pews, but to move and work for life, light, justice, and hope for all people. I am the daughter of Blanca, the granddaughter of Celsa and Angela, the sister of Mary Linda, and the aunt of Isabel and Mewa. There are many more women in my life and more stories to tell and stories to hear. Their stories changed my life, and I am here standing proud to be who I became, thanks to each of them. Remember their stories, their work of hope, tears, joy, courage, sweat, blood, prayers, and stubborn faith in the Creator of life keeps walking with you. Indeed, stories are waiting to be heard, created, and written. Your story is waiting. What will it be like? Remember, trust in yourselves and God's creation within you. Your aunt and sister in Christ, Alina Cicito. I think that is the perfect way to end what has been the most rewarding journey. Thank you to each and every one of you who has joined for this inaugural program of Letters to My Daughters. My prayer is that you will continue to find ways to pass down your knowledge and your wisdom to those who are coming after you. Or perhaps that you will avail yourself to gleaning the wisdom and the knowledge that is being passed down to you. All such that we may find a way to integrate this wisdom and knowledge into more ways that enliven our faith at this intersection of faith and advocacy. You all don't forget, we have a podcast that will go through the end of December to aid in this final module and is within the framework of Advent. I do hope that you enjoy. But this is the last time that we will be gathering in this virtual space. And so, until the next iteration of Letters to My Daughters, my prayer for you is that you would go in grace and that you would go in peace. Be well.